Barriers to intercultural communication. This is on page 33. We're going to be starting off with ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is believing that your own cultural group, the nationality or ethnicity of that cultural group, is superior to other cultural groups. So this is the belief that your own culture is better than other cultures. Obviously a negative perception to have and should not in any way be something you internalize and embody. It's a problem because it will prevent you from seeing anyone else's cultural perception lens and another point of view. So therefore, we should not be at all engaging with this because this is going to be a barrier to intercultural communication. They give an example here on page 33. When I asked my students to draw a world map in one intercultural communication class, we were all amazed to see that everybody started from different places. American students started from the map of the United States, Mexican students start from Mexico, and Chinese students start from China. Students are often confused about the locations of other countries or continents, partly because on the maps they are familiar with their own countries and always in the middle. So this is quite a nice example that it's quite obvious in a way that we're very proud of our own culture. We're proud of where we come from, our values, our attitudes, our beliefs all make up our own culture. We are proud of all of that. And this is quite a nice example to see that when we would draw the map, we might start with the continent of Africa because that's what we know and that is part of our own cultural lens. But by thinking that your culture is superior to another culture is going to limit that perception lens happening there. I want you to read the example of the different tribes of the Zulu culture and how this is now ethnocentrism to the extreme, to the point where it is interfering with another culture and it's becoming quite harmful to that culture. The second barrier is stereotyping. This is going on to page 33 to 34. They start off with a definition to say that it's widely held beliefs about a group of people. So you're going to generalize a group of people to say that they have this descriptive component. And this is also a barrier to communication and intercultural communication because they are harmful stereotypes as well as they are positive stereotypes. But this can be quite horrible for those that have a problem with those stereotypes. So by saying all attractive people are smart and socially skilled, it's going to have a problem for those individuals that might feel pressure, to have to be part of that stereotype. So we should not at all hold any stereotypes. And a question that kind of flow into these pages on page 34 and 35 is, why do we have stereotypes? Is it because in film and media there is still a portrayal of stereotypes? And something I want to point out that they've also done the textbook is Leon Schuster and the portrayal of racist stereotypes there, and also generalizing cultures. You can also see the examples is in the Mr. Bones movies. There's other examples of racial stereotypes. There's a Zulu on my stoop and so forth. And if we've actually looked at the news lately, they've removed Leon Schuster films from Showmax because of their racial and cultural stereotypes portrayals there. Okay, so you can read through all these examples in the portrayal of Leon Schuster films. And how do we feel about these portrayal of still stereotypes in film and media? There's also stereotypes that persist in the media about religion. And this is to say Western portrayals of Islam as well. And also how people see Islam on the news. Okay, moving on to the next part of our barrier here. Stereotypes can develop from a negative experience. It can, as I say in the two-step process, recognize that there is negative stereotypes. If you feel like you are formulating a stereotype, try to obtain individual information that can counter the stereotype. Okay. This part of the work, which is quite nicely, makes use of a lot of examples that you can read through in your spare time and that I want you to read through because there's quite a lot of interesting examples here. Can you think of any South African stereotypes that still exist today? And how do you think you can sort of push against those stereotypes? Have you ever been victimized through stereotyping before? Okay, let's move on to the next barrier. Prejudice. Prejudice is a negative attitude towards a cultural group based on little or no experience. It's how we feel about that group, and it acts in different functions. So why is someone prejudiced towards someone? Why are they acting in this attitude towards them? Is it because firstly, they think it could lead to social rewards, which is that within their cultural group, they want to be accepted. So they're going to say, I agree to this, sort of attitude that we should hate these people or we should act this way towards them. So I am going to tend, or I'm just going to instill this belief so that I can adjust to the social group and get those sort of that positive feedback from them. The next adjustment, next function, they say, is the ego defensive function, which is that people may hold certain prejudices because they don't want to admit certain things about themselves, and they might just want to just believe them. For example, an instructor who does not feel successful as a teacher may find it easier to blame students and hold prejudice against them than to admit the shortcomings of the teacher. Therefore, we can hold and reinforce certain beliefs. Okay. To feel also positive about one's own group can also lead to having this prejudice. And there are lots of examples of these different kinds of prejudice that are prevalent today. On our next slide, we have here the colorblind approach that is part of our prejudice, part of the work here, which is to say that to counteract, with that there are these problems with the problem with color, should we just pretend that color doesn't exist at all? And this makes no sense because we do notice color. We can't ignore and deny and disregard that color exists, because then we're going to disregard those racial inequalities. Therefore, it's counterproductive to say that we don't see color. I'm just going to read out the extract here. The message I got from teachers at the school and other people was that the way not to be racist was to just pretend that you don't see any differences between people. And so everyone had feelings about race, but nobody talked. There was no place to talk about those feelings, those things, and you only have to treat everybody as an individual and everything will be fine. In my high school class, I asked a question about the civil rights movement and racism. The answer I got was basically that everything was fine. This is quite counterproductive, that you don't notice, a different cultural group being another race group. And that is not what we want to do here. The colorblind approach is not what you want to do. You want to understand the culture exists and understand the disparities of what happened in the past, acknowledge that there is this race, and not be, which comes on the next section, is to discriminate towards a different race. Okay, let's move on to discrimination. Discrimination, unlike prejudice, is the behavioral component, which is that instead of having a sense, we will have a negative attitude towards the other cultural group, but now we're going to behave accordingly, which is to exclude them, avoid them, distance ourselves from them. Because they are this race, because they are this sex, because they are this culture, I'm going to actually behave this way. This can be something as simple as, or not too simple, but ranging from I'm not going to hire them because they are this culture, or I'm going to act physically violent and harm this culture, this person of this culture. This is also an example. Discrimination is of xenophobia, which is that this is going to also lead to a barrier of intercultural communication because we are not supposed to exclude and behave this way. Another example is hate speech, which is to try to degrade and intimidate them by using this language against a group of people from a different culture. Discrimination can be on an interpersonal level. It can happen on institutional level as well. And lastly, they do note that young people need to reduce and work towards erasing prejudice, racism, and discrimination, and all sorts of barriers to intercultural communication. Racism is our last barrier to intercultural communication. Racism, in its simplest way of understanding, is judging someone, excluding, also using discrimination, prejudice against them, being racist through language, and all of those sort of things, by judging them on their outward physical appearance, the skin color and facial features. I want to note here that they have put here some history built on by Europeans involved in the slave trade who wrote about Africans in slavery. Their views were coming from an ethnocentrism point, and they gave classifications to the race of that they are homo ferus, meaning wild men are people that have a different skin color, which would be non-white, homo-fierce being wild men, homo-monstrous being monsters. And this is all linked to a racial hierarchy in the past, slavery, political and social historical contexts that led to this. There's also notes that people can be racist, and this can show in immigration as well. When people come to another country, you can be racist towards them. In South Africa, we do have a history of racism due to apartheid. And then also they've noted in this section that politicians use race in arguments and in debates. If they feel that they're losing, this is the argument now, is to use race against their opponents. I've also just included that in the Black Lives Matter that's happening now, we are getting, racism has always been there over the years, but we are getting more coverage of it, especially in America. And that this has to do with George Floyd and Elijah and so on. And it's good that they're drawing attention to that this is happening out there in the media. And these all make up barriers to intercultural communication. Okay, so that is our recap. We've completed Learning Unit 1, Theme 1, which is quite a good chunk of our theory. It's laying the foundation of, do we understand exactly what defines intercultural communication, or the cultures interacting with each other? The 4 building blocks that make up our culture and our communication being just culture, communication, power, and context. Culture having the 6 characteristics, communication, which kind of ties back to our COSC-A work. Context, which is that when we communicate into different culture, we have to take into account a political context, a historical context, the physical context, as well as the power that there is a hierarchy in societies. Is there a dominant culture there? Am I part of this group, this voluntary and involuntary group? As well as that power can be negotiated, and what we can do to counteract against the power in that hierarchy, which is through boycotts and strikes. Then we move on to the barriers here that we do have. Ethnocentrism being that you believe that your culture is superior to another culture. Stereotypes, and as I've linked as well to in the lesson plan, the different activities we can look at there, the portrayal of stereotypes in film and what you can spot there as well. Then we move on to prejudice, which is having a negative attitude towards someone of a different cultural group, and discrimination, which is to behave accordingly to in those stereotypes, using hate speech or violence, or just avoiding and excluding them. And lastly, racism, which, as we see now with the Black Lives Matter movement, the history of slavery through homo-fierce and homo-monstrous, and immigration, as well as that this is judging someone on their physical outward appearance, makes up the first theme 1. Okay, please see your lesson plan and do your textbook and VC Learn activities, and remember to write down notes on about the slideshow. Anything that you do not understand that you can ask your lecturer.